Max Payne 3 is easily one of the best action games ever made, and it is crazy that Rockstar released this so long ago because it still plays better than almost anything coming out today. You play as Max, who is totally washed up and living a miserable life back in New Jersey, until an old friend convinces him to take a private security job down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Max thinks he is just going to be a bodyguard for rich people and drink his sorrows away, but everything goes wrong immediately when the wife of his boss gets kidnapped by a powerful street gang. The story takes you on a wild ride through nightclubs and football stadiums and rundown favelas and even a police station as Max tries to fix his mistakes. You really feel his desperation because halfway through the game, he gets so fed up that he shaves his head completely bald and decides to go to war with everyone in the city. The gameplay is built around the famous bullet time mechanic, which lets you slow down time whenever you want so you can aim perfectly at bad guys while diving through the air. It is not just a gimmick because the game is actually pretty hard, and you need to use that slow motion to survive when you are surrounded by 10 enemies at once. Max feels heavy and realistic when you move him around, and you can feel the weight of his body when he slams into a wall or lands on the ground after a shoot dodge. There's also a really cool feature called Last Man Standing, where if you take too much damage and are about to die, you get one last chance to shoot the guy who shot you in slow motion to regain some health and stay alive. One of the coolest things about this game is how it handles weapons, because Max does not have magic pockets where he can hide 10 guns. If you were carrying a big assault rifle and you decide to pull out your dual pistols, Max will actually drop the rifle on the ground or hold it in his offhand, which makes the inventory feel super grounded and real. The attention to detail is insane because you can see the sweat soaking through Max's shirt as the level goes on, and you can see individual bullet holes in his jacket. The graphics use this glitchy visual style that flashes words on the screen to show how messed up Max's head is from all the drinking and painkillers he takes. You also have to talk about the soundtrack because it creates this incredible atmosphere that makes you feel like you are the hero in a sad but awesome action movie. The game is totally linear, so you never get lost, and the pacing is perfect because it keeps throwing you into new situations like shooting from a helicopter or sliding down a roof. It is a masterpiece of third-person shooting, and if you missed it back in the day, you absolutely need to experience it now. Tomb Raider Underworld is the final game in the classic trilogy before the series got rebooted, and it is honestly the best looking and most ambitious one of that old style. You play as Lara Croft, and she is on a deeply personal mission to find her missing mother, which leads her to investigate myths about the Norse god Thor and his legendary hammer Mjolnir. The game starts with a huge explosion at her mansion and then jumps back in time to show you how everything led up to that crazy moment. You travel to some incredible locations like the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and the lush jungles of Thailand, and the rainy forests of Mexico, and the icy Arctic. The graphics were ahead of their time, and the environments are huge and open, which makes you feel like you are actually exploring lost civilizations that no one has touched for centuries. The gameplay is all about platforming and climbing and solving massive puzzles, rather than just shooting endless waves of bad guys. Lara moves really smoothly in this one because they used motion capture to make her jump and swing and climb like a real gymnast. The puzzles are genuinely clever and usually involve moving giant statues or pulling levers to operate ancient machinery that spans across the entire level. You have to pay attention to your surroundings because there are no glowing markers telling you exactly where to go, so you have to use your brain to figure out the path forward. One of the best parts of the game is when you go to southern Mexico and you get to ride Lara's motorcycle through the jungle to travel between different Mayan temples. It gives you a sense of freedom and speed that breaks up the slow climbing sections perfectly, and the bike controls feel surprisingly good for an adventure game. The combat is pretty standard with your dual pistols and sticky grenades, but later in the game you actually get to wield Thor's hammer, and it makes you feel incredibly powerful because you can blast enemies with lightning bolts. There are also some really epic moments, like when you have to deal with a gigantic kraken monster in an underwater temple by dropping a huge spike on its head instead of fighting it directly. It captures that lonely and mysterious vibe of being a Tomb Raider perfectly, and it is a great send-off for the classic version of Lara Croft. Uncharted 4 is basically the grand finale for Nathan Drake, and it is honestly kind of emotional because you get to see the end of a huge era for PlayStation. This game came out way back in 2016, which is wild to think about, but it still looks better than half the stuff coming out now, because the people at Naughty Dog are absolute wizards when it comes to graphics and details. You can tell they learned a lot from making The Last of Us, because the story here feels way more mature and serious than the older Uncharted games where you just shot 1,000 dudes and cracked jokes. Nate is trying to live a normal, boring life, and he has retired from being a thief, but then his brother Sam pops up out of nowhere and drags him back in for one last job to find some pirate treasure. It feels super grounded, and the acting is so good that you sometimes forget you are playing a game and not just watching a really high-budget movie. The gameplay is just pure fun, and they finally opened up the levels so you are not just running down a narrow hallway the whole time. Naughty Dog called this wide linear, which means you still go from point A to point B, but you have a ton of space to explore and drive around in your Jeep. The driving feels heavy and realistic, and you spend a lot of time driving through the mud in Madagascar, and the mud physics are honestly still the best I have ever seen, because your tires get stuck and slide around exactly like they would in real life. They also gave Nate a grappling hook for the first time, and it totally changes the game because you can swing across giant gaps or jump off a cliff and swing down to punch a bad guy in the face. It makes the combat feel so much faster and looser because you can run and hide in the grass to be stealthy or just go in guns blazing and swinging around like Tarzan. You have to respect how much work went into this game because there is a scene where you are being chased by an armored truck through a city, and everything is exploding and crashing, and it is all happening in real time. You seamlessly jump from your Jeep to a motorcycle and get dragged behind a truck on a rope, and it is just pure adrenaline from start to finish. This was the peak of that cinematic action game era where everything was polished to perfection, and there were no bugs or glitches on launch day, which is something we definitely took for granted back then. The pacing is a bit slower than the other games because there are chapters where you just walk around a house or explore a cave and talk to your brother, but those quiet moments make the loud action parts hit so much harder. It is just a masterclass in how to end a series, and if you have a PlayStation, you literally have to play this game at least once. Wolfenstein Old Blood. Wolfenstein The Old Blood is a standalone prequel to Wolfenstein The New Order, and it's basically a throwback to old school action mixed with modern smooth gameplay. It's set in 1946, right before the events of The New Order, and you play as BJ Blazkowicz again. He's older, tough as nails, and pretty much built for chaos. The story here is smaller and more focused, not some giant world-saving plot. It's more like a gritty spy mission gone wrong where everything keeps getting worse. The game starts with BJ sneaking into Castle Wolfenstein because he and his team need secret intel that might give them a fighting chance against the Nazis. The whole first half of the game is just you exploring the castle, sneaking past guards, getting caught, breaking out, fighting through halls, prison cells, tunnels, labs, all that classic Wolfenstein stuff. It's very old school Nazi fortress in tone, and it feels like a big nod to the original 90s Wolfenstein while still looking and playing modern. The cool thing about the Old Blood is how much variety they fit into a shorter game. 1 minute you're quietly sneaking with a pipe weapon, climbing walls, crawling through vents, taking down guards one by one. The next minute it explodes into full gunfights with shotguns, rifles, heavy armor enemies, and crazy machines. The gunplay is sharp and weighty, and the weapons feel strong without feeling like superhero toys. BJ is a tough guy, but the game keeps him grounded. You take hits, you bleed, you duck behind cover, and every fight feels like a push forward instead of a power trip. Then halfway through, the tone changes. Something that Nazis have been messing with basically breaks loose, and the game goes into full undead mode. The world gets darker, more broken, and suddenly you're fighting zombie soldiers along with regular troops. It doesn't feel like random zombies for no reason. They fit it into the Wolfenstein alternate history style where the Nazis are always messing with weird science and supernatural stuff. It adds a fun horror twist without turning the whole game into a zombie shooter. The environment design is a big part of what makes the game work. Castle Wolfenstein feels cold and stiff, filled with old stone walls, iron gates, secret rooms, and heavy Nazi decoration everywhere. Later areas take you to small German towns, forests, mountain paths, underground caves, and labs full of machines and experiments. It's all very atmospheric, and the lighting and shadows make everything look tense even when nothing is happening. BJ is still the same straightforward guy he always is, not talkative, not emotional, just focused, tough, and sometimes even a little tired of all the madness. But that gives the game a nice balance. He reacts to things like a guy who has seen way too much war. Not dramatic, just, alright, here we go again. Gameplay systems are simple but clean. You can dual-wield guns, throw knives, sneak around for silent takedowns, use pipes to climb and break things, and grab tons of collectibles like letters or gold. The pacing is good, with quiet sneaking sections breaking up the loud gunfights, so it never feels repetitive. And for a smaller game, it still has big set pieces like burning towns, collapsing bridges, giant mechanical dogs, and chaotic last stands. The Old Blood isn't trying to be deep or emotional like the New Order. It's more about action, world building, and showing what BJ was doing before the big events of the main game. It fills in some lore, gives you more time in that alternate history world, and basically acts like a love letter to old Wolfenstein games with new age polish. If you want a single-player shooter that's fun, fast, stylish, and filled with strong atmosphere and cool levels, this one's a solid pick. It's not super long, but it's packed with good stuff, and it knows exactly what it wants to be. A tight, action-heavy Wolfenstein adventure with a little horror twist on top. Mafia II is one of those story games that really pulls you into its world. It drops you straight into the 1940s and 1950s, and the whole thing feels like a long, slow-burn gangster movie. You play as Vito Scaletta, this kid who grows up in a poor immigrant family. His dad works himself to death, the bills never get paid, and Vito just gets tired of watching his mom struggle every day. When he comes back home after World War II, he wants a clean break, but life doesn't really give him that option. Bills start piling up again, trouble shows up fast, and that's when he and his best friend Joe slip into the mafia life, thinking it's the easy way out. The whole city of Empire Bay feels super alive. It's not a playground, it's more like a big movie set that you're walking through. You get these snowy streets in winter where cars move slow and everything looks cold and gray. Then you have the bright 50s era with neon signs, shiny diners, glowing ads, and that old music playing on the radio. The attention to the small stuff is crazy. The posters, the clothes, the way people talk, the style of each neighborhood, everything feels like someone put real care into making it look and sound like that time period. The story is the main thing here. It's not trying to be some open world checklist game. It's way more personal. It's about Vito trying to rise up because he wants a better life, but every step he takes pulls him deeper into problems. You see how easy it is for dreams to twist into something ugly. His friendship with Joe is a huge part of it. Joe is loud, messy, and not the smartest guy, but he's always down to help Vito, even if he drags him into crazy situations. Their dynamic feels natural, like two guys who grew up together, talk trash, make stupid choices, and still got each other's backs. Mission-wise, the game gives you a ton of variety. You rob stores, chase people through back alleys, sneak into buildings, dump bodies, get into full shootouts with rival crews, and even go through big cinematic moments where everything goes nuts. The guns sound heavy and rough, and every fight feels tight and gritty. There's no superhero stuff here. When you mess up, you feel it. When you get hit, it hurts. And when a mission goes well, it feels clean and satisfying. The pacing is also on point. You get slow moments where Vito is just trying to live his life, buying new clothes, hanging out at home, earning money, then suddenly everything explodes and you're in the middle of a huge war between crime families. It builds tension in a really good way. You always feel like something big is coming. The world itself also shifts with the story. You move from a beat-up old house to a nicer apartment, you see the seasons change, the city around you slowly reflects the time passing and the choices Vito makes. It gives the whole thing a grounded, real feeling, like you're living through years of someone's life and watching it unfold piece by piece. If you're into crime dramas with strong characters, heavy moments, and that classic American mob vibe, this one is a must-play. Sleeping Dogs is seriously one of the most underrated open-world games ever made, and it is a total crime that we never got a sequel because this game does things that even Grand Theft Auto does not do. It actually started life as a game called True Crime Hong Kong and got cancelled by Activision before Square Enix saved it, and thank God they did because it turned out to be a masterpiece of an action movie simulator. You play as Wei Shen, who is an undercover cop trying to infiltrate the Sun On Yee triad in Hong Kong. And the story is just fantastic because you are constantly balancing your duty as a police officer with your loyalty to the criminal friends you make. It feels exactly like those classic Hong Kong action movies like Infernal Affairs, and the drama is surprisingly good with voice acting from big Hollywood names like Emma Stone and Lucy Liu, which gives it a really premium feel. The main thing that makes this game special is the combat, because unlike most open-world crime games where you just shoot everyone, Sleeping Dogs is all about martial arts. The fighting system feels a lot like the Batman Arkham games where you are surrounded by guys and you have to counter their attacks and punch them in the face, and it feels incredibly crunchy and satisfying. The best part is the environmental attacks, where you can grab an enemy and smash them into a phone booth or throw them into a dumpster or kick them into an electrical box. It can get pretty brutal because you can even use things like ice chippers or table saws during fights, which makes you feel like a total badass who uses the environment to survive. You do get guns eventually, but the kung fu is so good that you will honestly prefer just running up and kicking people. The city of Hong Kong itself is another huge reason to play this because it has a completely different vibe from the usual American cities we see in games like Los Santos or Liberty City. The streets are narrow and packed with people, and at night when it rains and the neon signs are reflecting off the wet pavement, it looks absolutely beautiful. You have to drive on the left side of the road, which takes some getting used to, and the driving has this arcade feel that lets you ram other cars off the road easily. There is this mechanic called the action hijack where you can hold a button while driving and Wait opens the door and jumps onto the car in front of him to take it over while moving at full speed, which never gets old. You also have to respect the amount of side stuff there is to do, because it is not just about fighting. You can go to karaoke bars and actually play a rhythm game to sing songs, or you can go betting on rooster fights, or participate in street races. It is just a super solid package that respects your time and gives you a really cool story without dragging on for 100 hours. Metro Last Light is one of those games that pulls you into its world so hard that after a while you kind of forget you're even playing a game. It's a first-person story shooter set in a ruined Moscow, based on the Metro novels by Dmitry Glukovsky. The whole world is basically dead after a nuclear war, and the remaining people live underground in the Metro system. Different stations turn into different factions, different cultures, different beliefs. And the surface is just a nightmare full of radiation, mutated creatures, broken buildings, and this depressing silence that makes everything feel wrong. You play as Artyom, a young soldier who isn't some big heroic guy. He's quiet, serious, and tired in the way that makes sense for the world he lives in. Last Light continues directly from Metro 2033, but it does a really good job making you feel the weight of what he did in the first game. He's dealing with guilt, doubt, and all the pressure people put on him. It's not told in some loud, dramatic way, it's more in the small lines he says, or how people talk to him, or the flashback-like visions he gets. The world building is honestly the strongest thing here. Every station you visit looks like people actually live there. You see kids running around, musicians playing, people arguing, soldiers cleaning guns, damaged walls patched with metal plates, flickering lights, and a ton of little details. It makes the world feel lived in, not just game levels. You can literally walk around and just listen to people talk, and it tells you more about the world than any cutscene would. The game has a strong mix of stealth and action. When you're underground, stealth really matters. Lights are your biggest enemy. If you stay in the shadows, you can sneak behind people, take them down quietly, or even spare them. You can shoot out bulbs, turn off generators, or unscrew light bulbs with your hands. Artyom carries a little lighter, a gas mask, air filters, bullets, and handmade weapons. It all feels very low-tech and dirty, but that's the point. This world is held together with tape, screws, and old parts. When things go loud, the combat is gritty and unstable. Guns shake, ammo is low, and enemies react aggressively. You don't spray bullets like a superhero, you fire in bursts, reload slow, take cover, and listen to the breathing inside your gas mask. The whole thing has a very sweaty, close quarters feeling. The surface sections are a big highlight. You have to put on your gas mask, change filters, wipe dirt and blood off the visor, and watch out for radiation pockets. The surface feels open, but also extremely dangerous. Mutants come out of nowhere, the sky looks sick and polluted, and the silence makes everything tense. Even walking across a field feels like a fight for survival. One thing people forget is how much atmosphere comes from sound. You hear echoes, distant screams, wind howling through broken buildings, metal creaking, slow footsteps, your own heavy breathing. The game barely uses music during gameplay, so the world itself becomes the soundtrack. Story-wise, Last Light is bigger than 2033, but still personal. You get pulled into a conflict between factions like the Reich, the Communists, and the Rangers. There's politics, betrayal, and a ton of tension because everyone wants control of the Metro. But at the same time, there's a supernatural element tied to the Dark Ones. These moments never feel forced. They show Artyom's connection with something he doesn't fully understand, and it gives the game a unique identity. It's not just another shoot mutants and soldiers story. The pacing is clean. You get quiet story moments, camps, tunnels, then suddenly full-on battles, then a creepy horror section, then back to exploration. Nothing feels thrown in for filler. Even the horror moments, like walking through ghost tunnels or hearing distant whispers, feel like they belong to the world, not some jump-scare gimmick. The decisions you make also matter, but in a very subtle way. The game doesn't pop up a choice menu, it just watches how you act. Do you help people? You spare enemies? Do you explore and listen to conversations? All those tiny actions push you toward either the good or bad ending. It's one of the few games where choices actually feel natural instead of forced. The Last of Us Part 1 is honestly one of the most important single-player games ever made. Not because it tries to be artsy, but because it mixes story, gameplay, and small details in a way that feels straight-up believable. It came out back in 2013 on the PS3, and for that time, it was crazy how good it looked, how real the characters felt, and how tight the whole experience was. The remake just makes everything cleaner, but the heart of the game is still the same. You play as Joel, a middle-aged guy who went through something horrible at the start of the outbreak. The game doesn't hide it or drag it out, it just hits you with it, and then jumps 20 years ahead when the fungus has already ruined the whole world. Cities are broken down, the government barely exists, and different groups run different areas, each with their own rules and problems. Joel is tired, he's seen too much, and he doesn't really care about anything anymore except staying alive. Then he ends up having to take Ellie, a teenage girl, across the country. It starts as a job, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, but the cool thing about this game is how slow and natural the relationship builds. It happens through small conversations, normal quiet moments, little jokes, arguments, the way they react to danger, and even the way they carry themselves when things go wrong. It feels like watching two people who don't fit together slowly become the only people they can rely on. The world itself feels like it went through a real disaster. There's a lot of attention to everyday stuff, ruined apartments where people once lived, notes left behind, cars stuck on highways, school buildings covered in mold, and areas where the infected basically took over. The fungus idea is actually inspired by a real thing called cordyceps that affects insects. So the whole infected concept doesn't feel like sci-fi zombies. It feels grounded, like something that could actually happen. Gameplay-wise, it's very simple on paper. You've got stealth, crafting, shooting, melee, and exploring. But the way the game handles these things is what makes it unique. The materials you pick up actually matter. You're always short on something, so building a health kit might mean you can't build a Molotov cocktail, and that choice changes how fights go. Guns shoot slow and rough, not like action hero style. Joel isn't some super soldier. He's older, he's slower, and the game shows that in his animations and the way he fights. When he punches someone, it looks like a guy who's fighting out of frustration and survival, not style. Different infected types matter too. Runners are basic but fast. Clickers use sound to see, so you have to move super carefully around them. Bloaters are tanky and throw spores. Each one changes the pace of the game. And the human enemies are just as dangerous, because they act like people trying to live in a broken world, not just generic enemies. A lot of people don't realize how much small stuff makes this game powerful. Ellie reacts to things around her. Comments on areas, picks up items to look at them, gets scared, gets excited, and talks when the moment feels right. Joel stays quiet a lot because that's who he is. Their personalities come out through normal actions, not big speeches. That's why the game feels more human than most other story games. You also go through different seasons as the story moves, and each one has its own tone. Summer is rough and full of danger. Fall feels sad and colder. Winter is brutal and brings some of the most memorable moments in the whole game. Spring feels lighter, but still uneasy. This slow shift helps the story feel like a full journey instead of levels. The music is another huge part of why the game hits hard. It's not loud orchestral stuff. It's mostly simple guitar notes from Gustavo Santaolalla. Nothing over the top, just small sounds that match the feeling of each scene, like the game refusing to push emotions too hard and just letting things breathe. The ending is one of those endings that gets people talking, because it's not good guy saves the world. It feels personal, messy, selfish, and honestly very believable for the type of man Joel is. It's one of the few endings in games where people still argue about it even today. The Last of Us Part 1 isn't special for one single thing. It's special because every part of it works together cleanly. The acting, the writing, the world design, the small details, the grounded gameplay, the slow pacing, the realistic characters, the way the game never treats you like a superhero. It feels like a road trip through a world that fell apart and two people trying to find something worth holding on to. That's why people say it's a must-play. It's heavy, it's emotional, but it's also just a damn well-made game from every angle. Gears of War 4 is the game that started a whole new era for the franchise because it was the first main game developed by the Coalition instead of the original creators at Epic Games. It was a huge deal back in the day because everyone was worried if the new studio could capture that magic, but they honestly nailed the heavy and crunchy feel that makes Gears so special. You play as JD Phoenix, who is the son of the legendary hero Marcus Phoenix from the first trilogy, and he has his own squad with his friends Kate and Bell. The story takes place 25 years after the war ended, and humanity is rebuilding, but suddenly a new enemy called the Swarm shows up to ruin everything. It is called because the first act makes you fight these security robots called DBs, which feels a bit different, but once the slime and monsters show up, it feels exactly like the classic Gears we all love. The gameplay is still the king of third-person cover shooters, and nobody does it better than this series. You have the famous roadie run where the camera shakes and you sprint low to the ground to slam into a wall for cover. The shooting feels incredibly impactful, especially when you use the Nasher shotgun to blow enemies into pieces, or use the Lancer, which is that iconic assault rifle with a chainsaw bayonet attached to it. They added some new moves like being able to reach over cover and yank an enemy towards you to stab them, which keeps the combat moving fast so you are not just sitting behind a wall the whole time. You also have the active reload mechanic where you have to tap a button at the exact right second during a reload to get a damage boost, and it makes even reloading your gun feel like a minigame. One of the sickest features in this game is the weather system because the planet is getting hit by these massive electrical storms called wind flares. The wind is so strong that it actually affects your grenades and projectiles, so if you throw a grenade into the wind, it might fly back at your face or curve around a corner. You have to dodge lightning strikes while fighting, and sometimes you can shoot loose pipes or debris to make them fly into enemies and crush them. It adds this chaotic layer to the fights that makes the world feel dangerous and alive. The graphics are also ridiculous because this game was a showcase for Unreal Engine 4, and even now the lighting and textures look amazing. The environments are super detailed, from the creepy underground mines to the stormy outdoor areas. It is also really cool to see old man Marcus Phoenix join up with the young squad because he is just a grumpy old dad who hates everything, and his banter with JD is genuinely funny. It might not be as legendary as the original trilogy, but it is a super solid action game that sets up the new story perfectly, and the gunplay is just pure, satisfying fun.
Should be okay here. Oh yeah? Define okay.
Not immediately dead?
Spec Ops: The Line is easily one of the most important games ever made, and it is crazy because if you look at the cover art, it just looks like another generic military shooter from 2012. The developers at Jaeger Development basically tricked everyone because they made a game that looks like Call of Duty, but is actually a psychological horror story about how war destroys people. You play as Captain Martin Walker, and you lead a small Delta Force team into Dubai, which has been completely destroyed by these massive, catastrophic sandstorms. The setting is incredible because you are walking through these super expensive fancy hotels and skyscrapers that are half buried in sand, and seeing all that luxury mixed with total destruction creates a really spooky atmosphere. The mission is supposed to be a simple rescue op to find a missing colonel named John Conrad, but obviously everything goes wrong immediately and you end up fighting American soldiers. The gameplay is honestly pretty standard third-person cover shooting, and a lot of people say it feels a bit generic or clunky compared to Gears of War, but that is actually kind of the point. You run from cover to cover and shoot waves of bad guys and throw grenades, but they added this cool sand mechanic where you can shoot out glass windows to bury enemies under tons of sand. It is not the most amazing gameplay in the world, but it serves the story because as you keep playing, the game starts to make you feel bad for doing the things you usually do in video games. The characters start out looking clean and using professional military language, but by the end of the game, their uniforms are torn and bloody, and they are just screaming and cursing while they shoot. You have to talk about the white phosphorus scene, because it is one of the most famous moments in gaming history, and without spoiling exactly what happens, it basically turns the whole hero fantasy upside down. The game starts messing with your head and you start seeing hallucinations, and the loading screens stop giving you gameplay tips and start asking you questions like, do you feel like a hero yet? It is based on the book Heart of Darkness, which is the same book the movie Apocalypse Now is based on, and you can really feel that descent into madness as Walker pushes further into the city. It was a huge risk for 2K Games to publish this because it is really anti-war and makes the player feel guilty. But that is why it is a masterpiece of storytelling. The graphics actually hold up pretty well because the art style of the sand and the bright sun makes it look very distinct compared to all the gray and brown shooters from that era. The voice acting is top tier, especially Nolan North, who plays Walker, because you can hear his voice get more desperate and broken as the game goes on. It is a short game that you can beat in a weekend, but it is the kind of experience that stays with you for years because it refuses to let you just be a mindless action hero. If you want a game that actually has something serious to say and isn't just about getting a high score, then this is the one you need to play.
Target down!
You're gonna have to talk fast, boss. He's fading.
We're here to help. Just stay with me, all right?
Forgive me. They took McPherson. You gotta find him.
We will, but I need you to tell me where they took him.
They took him to the...
Call of Juarez Gunslinger is basically that game you don't expect much from, then suddenly you're like, wait, why is this actually kind of fire? It's a first-person shooter, yeah, but the whole vibe is more like someone telling you a wild bar story while you play through it. You're this old bounty hunter named Silas Greaves, and he's sitting in a saloon, drinking and telling a bunch of random folks about all the crazy shootouts he had back in the day. And the cool part? The entire story changes based on how he tells it. Like, if he says, and then a whole bunch of bandits came out of nowhere, boom, the game literally rewinds time and suddenly more bandits spawn. Or if someone interrupts him and says, wait bro, that doesn't sound right, the level kind of shifts mid-play. Buildings reshape, enemies disappear, the sky changes because he's fixing his story. It's goofy, but in a good way. It gives the game this fun, playful personality. Gameplay-wise, it's super straightforward, super smooth. Fast gunfights, quick draw duels, bullet time slowdown where you kind of feel like a cowboy version of Max Payne, upgrades that make you crack shots at insane speed. It's not trying to be realistic, it's just stylish as hell. The guns have that punchy boom sound, dust flies everywhere, enemies yell dramatic cowboy lines, and Silas keeps talking smack the whole time like he's reliving his golden days. And honestly, the pacing is perfect. No boring filler, no dragging sections, it's just you blasting your way through frontier towns, canyons, mines, forests, all wrapped in this comic book art style that looks crisp without trying too hard. But the real fun part, the game knows it's telling a story. And the game itself kind of plays along. Sometimes Silas brags too much, and the level goes crazy. Sometimes he forgets a detail and rewinds. Sometimes someone in the saloon questions him and the whole direction shifts. It's like playing inside a tall tale. It's short, yeah, like a few hours, but it's tight, focused, and feels like the gaming equivalent of a good popcorn western. Not too serious, not too dumb, just the right amount of hell yeah. If you like clean, punchy gunplay and games with personality, this one lands. It's basically a bite-sized, stylish cowboy action story told by a dude who's probably exaggerating half of it, and you just go along for the ride.
Son of a bitch! Take him out! He's just one man!
Until Dawn.
I think this is
Until Dawn is basically an interactive horror movie where you control a whole group of teenagers stuck in a mountain lodge for one long awful night. It's made by Supermassive Games, the same guys who later made all those Dark Pictures titles, but this one is still their best work by far. It came out in the PS4 era, and a lot of people didn't expect much from it, but it blew up because it felt fresh and super fun to watch and play. So the setup is simple. A bunch of friends return to an old mountain cabin a year after something terrible happened there. They're trying to move on, chill, reconnect, whatever, but the place is basically cursed with bad vibes from the second they step foot in it. The game plays out like a movie, third person, fixed camera angles, a lot of sneaking around dark hallways, traps, jump scares, weird noises in the woods, all like classic horror stuff. But the big thing here is the choices. Every decision you make actually matters. It's not fake choice where nothing changes. In this game, people really die. Like, brutally. And when someone dies, they're gone for the rest of the story. No cheap revives. Because of that, you start treating every tiny decision with stress. Even the most innocent choices, like go left or right, open this door now or later, save someone or grab something first, can completely flip the ending. The game constantly reminds you about the butterfly effect. Basically, small choices snowball into big stuff. The characters are very teen movie-ish on purpose. You've got the nice guy, the jerk, the shy girl, the queen bee, the funny dude, the athletic dude, all the usual types. But as the night goes on, you actually start liking or hating them because the writing and acting are surprisingly solid. And the performances stand out because the game used full motion capture, their real faces, real expressions. It makes it feel like you're watching a real show. The horror in this game isn't just boo jump scare. It mixes psychological horror, slasher movie energy, and even a bit of weird folklore. The cool thing is that the story doesn't stick to just one type of threat. It switches lanes and keeps you guessing what the hell is actually happening on that mountain. And one thing people never forget is how the game keeps shifting tone. At first, it feels like a typical teen slasher setup. Then it slowly starts turning into something way darker and way stranger. They drop hints through old clues, hidden recordings, newspaper cutouts, weird visions, creepy doctor scenes, little pieces that start forming a bigger picture. Gameplay-wise, it's mostly exploring, making choices, and quick-time events. And yeah, the QTEs matter a lot. Miss one at the wrong moment, someone's head might be rolling next scene. Some people try to do the save everybody run, and others just let chaos happen because it's fun watching how wildly things can go wrong. What makes Until Dawn stand out is that it feels like a full package. The atmosphere, the story, the production quality, the sense of tension, because anyone can die at any time. It's not deep in a philosophical way, it's just a damn entertaining, stylish horror ride with enough surprises to keep you hooked for a whole night. And that's kind of the whole point. It's a sit with your friends, scream, laugh, and argue over choices kind of game. Even playing alone is fun because it feels like you're running a personal horror movie where you decide who lives and who gets wrecked. The Saboteur is one of those cult classics that everyone seems to have forgotten about, but it is actually one of the coolest open-world games from the Xbox 360 and PS3 era. It was the last game made by Pandemic Studios, who were the legends behind the original Star Wars Battlefront and Mercenaries, so it has that chaotic fun DNA in it. You play as an Irish race car driver named Sean Devlin who is stuck in Paris during World War II, and he is not a trained soldier or a super spy, he is just a tough mechanic who is really angry at the Nazis for killing his best friend. The story is a classic revenge tale, and Sean is such a distinct character because he is tough and drinks a lot and cracks jokes while blowing stuff up, which makes him way more interesting than the usual boring military heroes. The most famous thing about this game is the art style, because it uses this super unique system called the Will to Fight. When you enter a district of Paris that is under heavy Nazi control, the whole screen turns black and white like an old Noire movie or Sin City, and the only color you see is the bright red of the Nazi flags and armbands and the yellow of the streetlights. It looks absolutely incredible and stylish, and gives the game a dark mood that nothing else has. As you complete missions, and blow up sniper towers and inspire the citizens, the color literally bleeds back into the world in real time, so the sky turns blue and the grass turns green. It makes you feel like you're actually making a difference in the world because you can visually see your progress spreading across the map. The gameplay is basically a mix of Grand Theft Auto and Assassin's Creed, because you spend a lot of time climbing up buildings to escape patrols or find good sniping spots. You can climb almost anything in the city, including the Eiffel Tower, which is a huge moment in the game. Since Sean is a professional driver, the cars actually feel pretty heavy and fun to drive, and you can collect different vintage vehicles to store in your garage. There's also a stealth mechanic where you can sneak up on a soldier and take his uniform to wear as a disguise. so you can walk right into enemy bases. It's kind of funny because if you act suspicious or run too close to enemies, they will figure it out, and the disguise meter blows, which usually leads to a massive shootout. You have to admit the game has some jank because the climbing animations can be a bit stiff, and the shooting is not as tight as modern games, but it has so much charm that you honestly do not even care. The atmosphere is top tier with smooth jazz music playing on the radio, and the cabaret clubs and the resistance fighters helping you out in the streets. It's really satisfying to run around planting dynamite on tanks and watch the explosions because the physics are pretty wild and chaotic. It's a game that just wants you to have fun and look cool doing it, and the unique black and white visual style alone makes it worth revisiting in 2026. Far Cry Primal. Far Cry Primal is basically Far Cry thrown all the way back to the Stone Age. No guns, no cars, no radio towers, none of that usual Far Cry stuff. You're living in 10,000 BC in a world full of wild animals, rival tribes, fire everywhere, and people who survive by pure instinct. It feels rough, dirty, and kinda cool in its own way. You play as Takar, a hunter from the Wenja tribe. At the start, you're basically nobody, just a guy trying to make it through the day without getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. But things go bad, your group gets wiped, and now you're left alone in this giant prehistoric valley called Oros. Your whole mission turns into rebuilding your tribe from scratch. You rescue people, gather them, build huts, get specialists, and slowly turn this tiny village into something strong. The world is a huge open map, but instead of outposts filled with soldiers, it's camps full of angry tribes, beast dens, bonfires, and hostile wildlife that attacks you out of nowhere. Everything feels more raw. You hear distant roars, see tall grass moving, and you get that small oh crap feeling every time the sun goes down. The most unique thing about the game is the beast taming system. You can actually tame animals and have them fight with you. Wolves, bears, saber-tooths, jaguars, even a freaking badger that fights like it's possessed. Every animal has its own vibe. Some sneak, some tank hits, some run fast, you whistle and they come running to help. It gives the game this cool survival buddy feeling. Combat is all close range stuff. Spears, clubs, bows, slings. You craft everything with stones, wood, and animal parts. Nothing fancy. You light your spear on fire, throw it, watch someone run around screaming. It's chaotic, but in a fun caveman way. The bow in this game feels great too, heavy and satisfying. The story isn't super complicated, but it works for what the game is doing. It's more about survival than deep drama. You're trying to protect your people from two major enemy tribes. The Udam, who are brutal and tough and eat other tribes. The Azila, who are more advanced, use fire like crazy, and act like they're gods. Takar basically rises from being a lost hunter to this legendary beastmaster guy everyone fears. You get big moments, crazy rituals, weird drug visions, Far Cry tradition, boss fights, and tribal warfare that feels intense because everything's up close and personal. The vibes are strong too. The game uses a made-up prehistoric language that actually sounds believable. The lighting, the forests, the snowy mountains, the caves, everything feels alive. You hear wolves howling, owls screeching, people chanting around fires. It's like you're dropped into a Discovery Channel documentary, but someone handed you a flaming club. The game stands out because it isn't trying to be a modern shooter. It's just this wild survival adventure with a cool setting you don't see in games often. Some folks slept on it when it came out, but honestly, it aged well if you want something different, something where you feel the world more than you play it. Hitman Absolution is definitely the black sheep of the franchise, and hardcore fans were super angry when it came out because it changed the formula completely. But honestly, it is a fantastic action game if you stop comparing it to the others. The developers at IO Interactive decided to trade the big open sandbox maps for a more linear story-driven experience that feels like a gritty grindhouse movie from the 70s. You play as Agent 47, but this time he is on the run from his own agency, and he's trying to protect a teenage girl named Victoria, which makes the story way more personal and emotional than just taking contracts for money. The vibe is really dirty and seedy, and the villains are these disgusting, exaggerated characters like a gross cowboy arms dealer and a group of assassin nuns dressed in latex, which shows just how weird and bold the game is willing to be. The graphics were mind-blowing in 2012, and they actually hold up incredible well today because the lighting and the art style are just top tier. The first real level takes place in a Chinatown market, and the sheer amount of people on screen is insane, because there are hundreds of NPCs walking around and reacting to you, which makes the world feel alive and crowded. The game uses this really heavy cinematic style with lots of lens flare and bloom lighting that makes everything look dramatic and intense. It runs on the Glacier 2 engine, which is the early version of the tech that powers the modern Hitman trilogy, so the controls feel responsive and smooth compared to the older clunky games like Blood Money. The gameplay is a mix of stealth and action, but it is controversial because the disguise system is super punishing. If you dress up as a cop, every single other cop in the level will recognize you if you get too close, which forces you to sneak around more rather than hiding in plain sight. They added a feature called Instinct, which lets you see enemies through walls and predict their paths, and it also lets you use a move called point shooting, where you can pause time and tag a bunch of enemies to shoot them all at once in a cinematic burst. It makes you feel like an unstoppable super soldier, which fits the action movie vibe perfectly, even if it made the stealth purists mad. You have to appreciate how weird the levels are, because instead of just infiltrating a mansion, you are sneaking through a cornfield while escaping the police, or fighting your way through a wrestling match, or navigating a burning library. There's a really funny level where you can dress up as a giant chipmunk mascot to hide from bad guys, which is classic Hitman humor. It is a much more linear game where you move from room to room instead of exploring a huge map, but the pacing is tight and the shooting mechanics are actually some of the best in the series. It's a unique experiment that the developers never tried again, so it stands out as this weird, beautiful action game that is definitely worth a playthrough in 2026. LA Noire puts you in the shoes of Cole Phelps, a World War II veteran who becomes a cop in 1940s Los Angeles. The whole game is built like an old-school detective movie. It's not about running in guns blazing all the time. It's more about thinking, reading people, walking crime scenes, and slowly putting pieces together. You move through the police ranks, starting as a basic patrol officer, then going to traffic, homicide, vice, and finally arson. Each desk has its own vibe and its own type of cases. One mission you're dealing with car thefts, the next you're solving brutal murders, then suddenly you're tangled in corruption and big city politics. The big standout thing here is the facial capture tech. At the time, this was insane. Every actor's face was recorded in full detail, so when they talk, you see every twitch, every eye movement, every tiny smile or lie. The whole point is that you're supposed to read their faces. When you interview suspects and witnesses, you're basically doing real-time lie detection. Some people look away too much, some try harder to look calm, some crack under pressure. It's a simple system on paper, but the acting sells it. Most of the gameplay is split between investigating crime scenes, walking around, finding clues, flipping objects in your hand, checking pockets, footprints, blood trails, interrogations. This is where the acting and your judgment matter. Chases and shootouts, car chases through old LA streets, foot chases over rooftops, gunfights in factories or empty buildings, driving around 1940s Los Angeles. The city is huge and recreated with a lot of detail, from old cars to neon signs to jazz clubs. It's basically split between those things. The cases feel like episodes from a TV crime drama. You walk into a scene, inspect everything, find a clue that leads to another location, talk to someone there, get another lead, maybe it turns into a chase or a shootout. Then finally you come back and make an accusation. Some cases feel clean, some get messy, and sometimes you're not even sure you made the right call. The game likes to put doubt in your head. One thing that makes this game unique is the way it mixes the shiny look of 1940s LA with the ugly truth behind it. You see corruption everywhere. Crooked cops, shady business deals, abuse, drugs, cover-ups. Cole Phelps himself isn't perfect either. He has flaws, secrets, and the game slowly digs into his past and shows how his war trauma and guilt shaped him. The story gets heavier the deeper you go. What starts as solve the case, move on, slowly becomes this bigger picture of how broken the whole system is. You start realizing your job isn't just about catching criminals. Sometimes it's about dealing with what the city tries to hide. The atmosphere in the city is a big part of the experience. You hear old jazz music on the radio, see newspapers blow in the wind, drive past diners, theaters, back alleys, and rich Hollywood neighborhoods. It feels like you're walking through a time capsule. LA Noire isn't meant to be fast-paced. It's more like you're sitting inside a long detective show where your brain is always working a little bit. And the cool thing is, it does something no other detective game really nailed. It lets you judge people by their faces, not just by text choices.
We found a license plate matching our stolen vehicle in the shed. Add in the assortment of parts, and we can make Gabriel for a dozen other thefts. It's time to get serious, Anna.
You must ask these questions of Gabriel. I know nothing of these car parts.
Then tell us where he is! If your baby is born in prison, Anna, the corrections officers will take it from you. You will see your son or daughter through a metal grate for half an hour a week.
The start line is on 1st and Santa Fe. There is a spillway under the bridge that leads to the river. Many policia have wrecked trying to follow him.
We will put in a good word for you, Anna. As far as we're concerned, this sits with Gabriel.
Start line? That sounds like a street race to me. It's gotten out of hand this last year. No wonder Delgado has such an eye for crime.
Batman Arkham Origins is the game that everyone loves to hate on just because it was made by WB Montreal instead of the original Rocksteady team, but honestly, it is the most underrated game in the entire series. It came out as a prequel to show us a younger and angrier Batman who is still learning how to be a hero, and he is way more brutal than the calm version we see in the later games. The vibe is absolutely perfect because it takes place on Christmas Eve during a massive blizzard, so the whole city is covered in snow and decorated with Christmas lights, which looks beautiful in a dark, gloomy way. The story is simple but effective because a villain named Black Mask puts a $50 million bounty on Batman's head and 8 of the deadliest assassins in the world fly into Gotham to kill him in one night. It feels like a stressful survival movie because you have guys like Deathstroke and Bane and Deadshot hunting you down while you were just trying to stop a riot. The gameplay is built on the same foundation as Arkham City, which means the free-flow combat is still the best in the business. You bounce between enemies, breaking bones and countering attacks, and it feels incredibly rhythmic and satisfying. They added a new weapon called the Shock Gloves, which let you punch through armor and shields with electricity, and it makes the combat feel faster and more aggressive because you don't have to worry about specific enemy types as much. The Predator stealth sections are also back and just as fun, where you hang from gargoyles and terrify bad guys before taking them out silently. They also upgraded the detective mode so you can actually reconstruct crime scenes by rewinding and fast-forwarding a holographic video to find clues, which makes you feel like an actual detective solving a mystery. You have to play this game just for the boss fights, because they are hands down the best in the entire Arkham franchise. The fight against Deathstroke is legendary because it is basically a martial arts dance, where you have to perfectly time your counters to block his staff attacks, and it tests your reflexes like crazy. There is also the situation with the voice acting, because the legendary Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill did not return for this one since the characters are supposed to be younger. Instead, you have Roger Craig Smith as Batman and Troy Baker as the Joker, and they actually do an incredible job of sounding like younger versions of those characters. The story digs deep into the relationship between Batman and the Joker and shows their very first meeting, which is super intense. It definitely had some bugs when it launched, but the city feels a bit empty because there are no civilians on the streets, but that is explained by the blizzard keeping everyone inside. The bridge that connects the two islands is annoying to cross because it takes forever, but once you unlock the fast travel jet, it gets way better. It is a solid Batman adventure that focuses on the boss battles and the Christmas atmosphere, and if you skipped it back in the day, you really need to give it a chance now.
whatever you want. Just please don't hurt me.
Beyond Two Souls is one of those games that blurs the line between a video game and a Hollywood movie, and it is probably the most ambitious project Quantic Dream ever made. You play as Jodie Holmes, and she is connected to this invisible, supernatural entity named Aiden. The story follows Jodie through her entire life, from being a scared little kid in a lab to a rebellious teenager, and finally a trained CIA agent, and it is an emotional roller coaster the whole way through. The gameplay is really unique because you are constantly switching controls between Jodie and the ghost entity Aiden. Playing as Jodie is pretty standard adventure game stuff where you walk around and talk to people and do quick-time events during action scenes, but playing as Aiden is where the real fun happens. You can detach from Jodie's body and fly through walls and ceilings to scout ahead or listen to conversations in other rooms. You can also interact with the world like a poltergeist by knocking over water bottles or smashing windows or possessing enemies to make them attack each other. There is a famous level early in the game where Jodie goes to a birthday party and the other kids are mean to her, and you get the choice to use Aiden to completely wreck the house and get revenge, which is just so satisfying to play. One thing you have to know is that the story was originally told out of order, so it would jump from her being an adult back to her being a kid, and then to her being a homeless runaway. It was kind of confusing for some people, but the newer versions on PC and PS4 let you play it in chronological order, which honestly makes the story flow way better. The game has some really weird pacing because one minute you are sneaking through a war zone in Africa, and the next minute you're living on a Navajo ranch fighting ancient spirits in the desert. That desert chapter is totally random and feels like a different game, but it just adds to the strange charm of the whole experience. You also have to give it credit for the homeless chapter because it slows the game down completely and forces you to survive on the streets in the winter. You have to beg for money to buy food and try to find a warm place to sleep, and it is a surprisingly deep and sad moment that most games would never try to do. The combat is not really about skill since it is mostly just pushing the stick in the direction Jodie is moving, but it looks really cool and cinematic like a Jason Bourne movie. It is definitely a game that wants you to focus on the story and the acting rather than high scores, and even though the writing gets a little crazy at the end, it is a journey you will not forget. The Walking Dead by Telltale is one of those games that hits harder than you expect. It's not about flashy action or wild graphics. It's all about characters, choices, and that feeling in your gut when something terrible is about to happen. It's set in the same world as the TV show and comics, but it follows its own original story, so you don't need to know anything beforehand. You play as Lee Everett, a guy with a rough past. The game starts with him being taken to prison in the back of a police car, and then suddenly everything goes to hell because the zombie outbreak hits. The whole world falls apart around him in minutes. Lee escapes and meets a little girl named Clementine, who becomes the heart and soul of the entire series. The whole game basically becomes about Lee trying to protect Clementine in a world where people are often more dangerous than the zombies. She's alone, scared, hiding in her house when you find her, and that early moment hits you because Lee doesn't just save her, he decides to take responsibility for her when nobody else will. The gameplay is simple but very tight. Talking to people, making choices that matter, exploring small areas, quick time moments during fights or escapes, solving small puzzles here and there. The magic is in the dialogue choices. You don't just pick lines to be nice or be mean. Everything you say changes how people trust you, how they treat Clementine, and even who will die later on. Some choices feel tiny in the moment, but later they come back in ways you didn't expect. And the game does a great job stressing you out without cheap tricks. You're always making these no perfect option choices. For example, who do you save when both people are in danger? What do you tell Clementine when she asks something painful? Who do you side with when the group starts falling apart? When do you lie? When do you tell the truth? The characters are the core of the experience. Every person you meet feels human, flawed, scared, and trying their best. Kenny, Lily, Ben, Carly, Doug, Chuck, everyone has their own story, their own trauma, their own breaking point. And the game isn't afraid to kill characters in ways that feel sudden and realistic, not dramatic or over the top. The writing is strong because it's grounded. People yell, cry, panic, blame each other, break down, apologize, make mistakes. It feels like a group of strangers trying to hold a broken world together by sheer will. The zombies are there, sure, but they're more like the constant pressure that pushes everybody to their limits. This game basically put Telltale on the map and showed everyone that story games can be powerful without huge budgets or crazy action. Quantum Break is one of the coolest and weirdest experiments in gaming history, and it comes from the maniacs at Remedy Entertainment who made Max Payne and Alan Wake. They tried something that nobody else has really dared to do, which is combining a high-budget video game with a live-action TV show. You play as Jack Joyce, who is played by the actor Shawn Ashmore, and he goes to visit his friend Paul Serene at a university for a time travel experiment. Obviously, everything goes horribly wrong, and time itself starts to break down, which gives Jack these insane time manipulation powers while his friend Paul becomes the villain. It is such a unique setup because you play a chapter of the game, and then you literally sit back and watch a 20-minute episode of a TV show that changes based on the choices you made in the game. The gameplay is actually super underrated because people tried to play it like a generic cover shooter like Gears of War, but that is the wrong way to do it. You are supposed to be aggressive because your powers let you dominate the battlefield. You can freeze enemies in a time bubble and pump it full of bullets, so when the bubble pops, they all hit at once and send the guy flying. You can also zip around the room instantly or create a time shield to block bullets while you reload. It feels incredibly fast and fluid once you get the hang of it, and it is basically the prototype for the combat they perfected later in their game Control. Visually, this game is a total masterpiece, and it is crazy that it came out in 2016 because the particle effects are still some of the best you will ever see. When time breaks down, the world freezes and gets all distorted with these jagged geometric shapes, and objects get stuck in mid-air. You walk through these frozen scenes called stutters, where an explosion is paused in the middle of going off, and you can walk around and look at the debris floating in the air. It is a trippy visual style that makes you feel like reality is shattering around you, and the Northlight engine handles all the lighting and destruction perfectly. The story deals with serious sci-fi concepts like closed time loops and the end of the world, but it stays grounded because of the acting. You have these moments called junction points where you actually play as the villain, Paul Serene, and decide how the bad guys are going to handle the situation. It gives you a reason to replay the game to see the different outcomes and different TV show scenes. It was a massive risk for Xbox to fund something this weird, but it is an unforgettable ride that totally holds up today.
Good morning.
Yeah. I guess I should go find Paul.
Battlefield Hardline is easily the most hated game in the entire series by the hardcore fans. But looking back at it now, it is actually a super fun and unique single-player experience. The reason people were mad is because they wanted another big military war game, but instead we got a cops and robbers story made by Visceral Games, who are the legends that made Dead Space. It does not feel like a traditional Battlefield game at all because instead of a soldier invading a country, you play as a detective named Nick Mendoza fighting the drug war in Miami. The whole game is presented exactly like a TV police drama, where every level is called an episode, and when you quit the game and come back, it literally plays a clip that says previously on Battlefield Hardline. It is a really cool style that makes you feel like you are binge-watching a high-budget show on Netflix with car chases and corrupt cops and prison breaks. The gameplay is totally different from Call of Duty or the other Battlefields because you actually get rewarded for not shooting people. You have a mechanic where you can sneak up on bad guys and flash your badge to make them freeze, and then you can arrest them and handcuff them to the ground. It creates this really tense stealth loop where you're trying to take down a whole room of criminals without firing a single bullet, so you can get more points to unlock better guns and gear. You also get a scanner that lets you tag enemies through walls and find evidence to solve side cases, which adds a nice layer of detective work to the usual running and gunning. Since it's a police game, you get access to some really fun gadgets that change how you move around the map, like a grappling hook to climb up buildings and a zipline crossbow to slide across gaps. The shooting is still built on the Frostbite engine, so it feels punchy and loud, and the destructible environments are awesome because walls and cover get shredded during firefights. There are some crazy set pieces, like fighting through a hurricane in a shopping mall, or escaping a massive grow house in the swamps while driving an airboat. The driving is a huge part of the game, and it feels surprisingly fast and arcade-like because you are usually in muscle cars or police cruisers instead of slow tanks. The graphics are honestly still really impressive, especially the facial animations during the cutscenes. It is definitely weird to see the Battlefield name on a game where you are arresting guys for selling weed, but if you ignore the title and just play it as a standalone action cop movie, it is a blast. It's a shame we will probably never get a sequel because Visceral Games got shut down, But this game remains a hidden gem that tried something bold and different.
Hey, slow down.
Okay.
Is there a problem, ma'am?
Lid doesn't fucking fit.
Well, good luck, ma'am.
Fuck you!
You want me to call for backup, Mendoza?
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed 2 is honestly the greatest game in the entire franchise, and it is the reason why everybody fell in love with this series in the first place. This game was a massive jump from the first one because it took everything that was clunky about the original and made it feel fast, smooth, and incredibly fun. You play as Ezio Auditore de Firenze, who is the absolute best character in the history of Assassin's Creed, and the whole game is his origin story. It starts when he's a teenager and his family gets betrayed and killed, which kicks off his long personal quest for revenge against the Templars in Renaissance Italy. The setting is unbelievably beautiful and vibrant because you get to explore huge Italian cities like Florence and Venice, which are just packed with historical detail and famous landmarks. You can climb literally every single building, including cathedrals and bell towers, and the parkour system is so much smoother than it feels like Ezio is actually flowing across the rooftops. The combat is incredibly satisfying because they added tons of new weapons and moves, so you can use 2 hidden blades at once or use a poison blade to make enemies go crazy and kill their friends. The game is just packed with style and it makes you feel like an absolute badass as you take out the bad guys. A massive feature they added in this game is the ability to rebuild your family's old home, which is a huge villa called Monteriggioni. You spend the entire game collecting money and investing it into renovating the bank and the shops and the armor displays. The more you spend on your home base, the more money it generates for you over time, so it gives you a super fun reason to explore and loot treasure chests. Plus, you are best friends with Leonardo da Vinci, who is the greatest inventor in history, and he is the guy who upgrades all your secret assassin gear. He is the one who puts the second hidden blade on your arm and even builds you a wild flying machine for one of the most iconic missions in the entire series. This game just completely perfected the classic Assassin's Creed formula before the series got huge and weird. The music is absolutely fantastic and cinematic, and the story is focused on brotherhood and finding lost secrets, which gives it a huge emotional weight. It is still the gold standard for historical open-world games, and if you want to experience the peak of the Assassin's Creed saga, then this is the one you need to revisit in 2026.
Stardy! You think you can threaten me? I'll give you nothing! You want my children? Take them! I have the instrument to make more!
When you change your mind, they'll be in the village outside the city!
Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is straight up legendary, and it is the game that proved that shooters could be just as big and insane as a summer blockbuster movie. Infinity Ward was at the absolute top of their game when they made this, and the campaign is pure, non-stop adrenaline from the second you start playing. The story takes place right after the first Modern Warfare, and things have gone completely off the rails because the Russians have somehow managed to invade American soil. You play as a bunch of different soldiers and commandos, including the classic hero Soap McTavish and the super mysterious and cool character Ghost, who wears that awesome skull mask. The best part about this game is how over-the-top and cinematic the action is, because you are literally fighting to defend the suburbs and the White House in Washington, D.C. You have a famous mission called Wolverines, where you are fighting in the middle of a destroyed fast food place and an empty shopping mall, which felt absolutely wild to play back in 2009. You also have missions where you are climbing giant snowy mountains or infiltrating an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, which just keeps throwing unique scenarios at you every 5 minutes. The shooting mechanics are super tight and fast, and everything feels snappy because this is the peak of that arcade shooter era. The graphics were absolutely insane for the time, and even now the pacing and polish of the campaign are unmatched. It is a short experience, maybe 6 or 7 hours total, but it never slows down and it never wastes your time with boring filler missions. The story is intense and deals with global terrorism and betrayal and massive stakes, which keeps you completely hooked. This game has a few scenes that were super controversial when it came out because the developers were trying to push the limits of what a game could even show. But those moments just prove how much impact the story had on people. If you're looking for a game that defined an entire era and gives you pure high-octane action without all the complicated open-world stuff, you have to revisit this one. It is a masterpiece of linear shooting, and it will remind you why Captain Price and Ghost became 2 of the most iconic video game characters ever created.
Houston, we're not scheduled for any satellite launches today, are we?
ISS Houston, stand by. We may have a problem here.
Houston, this is ISS.
GTA 4 is kind of a big deal for the series because it really tried to take the whole open world thing to a more real level. You play as Niko Bellic, this guy who comes to Liberty City, basically a super detailed New York City clone, hoping to escape his past and maybe find a better life. Of course, things don't go smoothly and you get pulled into all this crime, debt, and shady deals right away. The story is one of the stronger ones in the GTA franchise, at least in terms of tone, because it's less about crazy over-the-top antics and more about Niko's struggles, loyalty, betrayal, and trying to survive in the city that doesn't care about him. The characters feel more grounded than in some other GTA games, and a lot of the humor and dialogue is really sharp, even if it's a little dark sometimes. The gameplay is classic GTA, driving, shooting, and running around the city, but GTA 4 has this weird thing with its physics that makes cars feel heavier, more realistic. Some people love it because it makes driving a bit more tactical, but others find it frustrating because getting from point A to point B can feel slow and clunky compared to GTA 5. The open world is huge and detailed. Liberty City feels alive with pedestrians, traffic, events happening on the streets, and side missions that aren't just filler. You can run taxi missions, do vigilante stuff, or even play pool and go bowling, which adds some flavor. But GTA 4 also has its flaws. The driving and shooting controls, especially when it first came out, felt awkward to a lot of players, and the game's pacing can drag sometimes. Missions aren't always super exciting, and a few of them feel repetitive. Still, there's a lot to love. The city feels alive, the story's more grounded and emotional than people give it credit for, and there's this constant sense of tension where you feel like every choice and every interaction matters. It's not perfect, and it can be frustrating at times, but GTA 4 has a certain vibe that makes it stick. Like you're really walking the streets of Liberty City and living Niko's life, good and bad, even if it's messy and imperfect.
Come on, Niko, this is stupid. All for a woman? We should not throw everything away for one girl.
This is principle. We do this because we would not be stepped upon. By doing nothing, we let Vlad take everything from us. He takes our pride.
Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is kind of insane when you really think about it, because it's this huge open world game that still feels like a really well crafted story, which is not easy to pull off. You play as Venom Snake, who wakes up from a 9-year coma after his old base, Mother Base, gets destroyed in an attack. The story kicks in slow at first, but it's layered, with this mix of revenge, betrayal, and just all the shady stuff that goes on in private armies and secret organizations. It's interesting because the story isn't just in cutscenes. Sometimes you hear it through cassette tapes, sometimes from your soldiers at the base, and sometimes it's just in the environment, like a ruined village or an abandoned outpost that tells you something without words. The gameplay is huge. The world itself is massive, and the game doesn't force you down one path, which makes every mission feel different depending on how you approach it. You can crawl through sand, climb mountains, take helicopters to drop into enemy areas, or just roll in with guns and vehicles. There's a lot of attention to detail in how the world reacts to. If it rains, mud slows you down. Sandstorms mess with visibility, and guards talk to each other in a way that makes it feel alive. You're constantly thinking about your plan, but you also have freedom, which is pretty rare for a game of this scale. Then there's the whole Mother Base thing. You build it, recruit soldiers, send them on missions, and customize weapons and gear. It's not just some side thing, they actually interact with each other, and it changes the dynamic of the game. You start to care about your soldiers because they feel like real people, and there's a subtle story woven in their little interactions. You also get to develop cool gadgets, things like decoys, mine launchers, or rideable vehicles. And you can modify weapons to fit your playstyle, which is way more satisfying than just picking up a gun and shooting. What's really striking about Phantom Pain is how it balances big action moments with quiet ones. There are missions where you're literally alone in the desert at night, thinking about what you're doing and the people you've lost, and then other times it's pure chaos with explosions and helicopters flying around. The game also has a weird, unique history behind it. It was made after Hideo Kojima's split from Konami, and you can kind of feel that tension in the way the story touches on betrayal, loyalty, and obsession. Some parts of the story even feel like commentary on the gaming industry itself, which is wild if you notice it. The soundtrack, sound design, and visuals are nuts. Footsteps in sand, enemy chatter, the wind blowing through mountains, it all pulls you in without being over the top. There's a day-night cycle and weather system that actually matters, like guards behave differently, and you can use that to your advantage, or just let it mess with your plans. And the sheer scale of the world, combined with all the little details, makes it feel like you're living in this place, not just playing a level. By the end, Phantom Pain sticks with you because it's not just a game you finish and forget. There's a sense of melancholy, of what war does to people, and the story doesn't wrap things up neatly. You remember moments, little choices, and even failures. It's one of those games that rewards patience and attention, and it's easy to get lost in it for hours. It's kind of exhausting at times, but in the best way, because the world actually feels alive and dangerous and full of stuff to do.
Analysis complete.
The Darkness 2 is one of those shooters that just completely throws normal rules out the window, and it is a pure blast of violent, crazy fun. The first thing you notice is the art style, because the developers at Digital Extremes decided to make the whole game look exactly like a living comic book, which is perfect since the game is based on the Top Cow comic series. You play as Jackie Estacado, who is a mob boss in New York, and he is also the wielder of the ancient demonic power called the Darkness. After a failed hit on his life, the Darkness power comes roaring back, and now Jackie has to fight a cult called the Brotherhood, who are trying to steal the power for themselves. The gameplay is what makes this game so sick, because you get to quad wield. That means you are running around with 2 normal guns, like pistols or shotguns, and you also have 2 massive demon arms sticking out of your back. Those demon arms are the best part, because you can use one to grab a guy and hold him in the air while you shoot him with your pistol, and use the other arm to slice him in half or throw a car door at him. It is incredibly satisfying and fast-paced, because the game really wants you to move forward and get into chaotic fights using all 4 of your weapons at once. You also have to remember that the Darkness cannot stand light, so you are constantly running from streetlights and muzzle flashes, or using the demon arms to smash light fixtures to keep the shadows around you. The story is a cool mix of mob drama and supernatural horror, but it has this really sharp, dark humor too. Jackie has a sidekick called the Darkling, who is this little annoying goblin imp who follows you around and cracks the funniest and most inappropriate jokes. The game also messes with your head, because there are sequences where you are suddenly pulled into a psychiatric asylum that may or may not be real, and you have to question everything that's happening around you. It is a really unique way to tell the story, and it gives the game a great emotional weight that most shooters skip. The combination of the cel-shaded look with all the gore and the crazy executions just gives the game an aesthetic that nothing else can match. It is a perfect game to revisit if you are tired of the usual military shooters and just want something that feels totally over the top, fast, and wildly creative.
You must be Venus. I'm Jackie, Vinny's friend.
Well, any friend of Vinny's is a friend of mine. Why don't you come up to my room? I think I could arrange something special just for you. Follow me, handsome.
I was raised here. How fucked up is that?
You think I could just watch you do?
Yes! Murdered Soul Suspect is one of the most unique single-player games ever made, because the entire hook is that you die in the very first minute of the game, and then you have to solve your own murder as a ghost. It is a straight-up supernatural detective noir mystery that trades in complicated combat for pure atmosphere and clue solving. You play as Ronan O'Connor, who is a detective with a troubled past, and he gets thrown out a window and killed by a serial killer known as the Bell Killer in Salem, Massachusetts. Since he is killed before his time, Ronan gets stuck as a ghost, and he cannot rest until he figures out who killed him and why. The gameplay is what makes this game so cool, because since you are a ghost, you can literally walk through walls and pass through almost any solid object, which totally changes how you explore the environment. You spend the whole game possessing living people to read their minds and figure out what they know, or subtly influencing them to get them to remember a clue. The main loop is going to a crime scene and gathering evidence like notes and objects, and then you piece them together in your mind to make a deduction about the killer. It is a chill and thoughtful game that lets you focus on being a detective instead of just constantly shooting bad guys. The atmosphere is absolutely top tier because the game takes place in Salem, which is already known for its history of witches and the supernatural, so the setting just fits perfectly. The city is dark and rainy and moody, and you're constantly seeing the ghostly remains of other dead people or weird supernatural portals that give you hints about the spirit world. You do run into these shadow demons sometimes that will try to drag your soul away, and those encounters turn into little stealth puzzles where you have to sneak up behind them and banish them. The combat against the demons is pretty simple and not the best part of the game, but it is just enough to break up the clue-finding sections. Honestly, the game got some bad reviews because the puzzles are kind of easy and the demon fights are basic, but the story and the dark vibe are what carry the whole experience. It is a shorter game that you can definitely beat in a weekend, and it is perfect if you just want to sink into a really dark and unique mystery where you get to use weird supernatural powers to solve a crime. You will stick with it just to figure out who the Bell Killer is and see the final twist. Vampyr is one of those games that really sticks with you because it mixes this dark, emotional story with a gameplay loop that makes you feel constantly torn. You play as Dr. Jonathan Reed, a doctor in London during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which already sets this really grim, heavy tone for the game. Right off the bat, Reed becomes a vampire, so now you're stuck balancing this new monstrous hunger with your role as a doctor trying to help people. The game makes it clear that every choice matters. Every time you feed on someone, it affects the world around you, and sometimes the consequences aren't obvious until much later. People might go missing, crime might rise, or certain characters could disappear entirely. So there's this constant tension between surviving as a vampire and trying to retain your humanity. That's really what makes Vampyr feel different from other action RPGs. It's not just about leveling up and fighting, it's about the moral weight behind your actions. The combat is a mix of melee, ranged, and vampire powers, and it can be pretty fun when you get into it. You've got swords, stakes, and guns, but also powers like dashing across the battlefield, summoning mist, or freezing enemies, which makes fights feel varied if you pay attention to what works best against different enemy types. That said, the combat isn't flawless. Some fights can feel repetitive, especially in the middle of the game, and boss battles sometimes rely more on spongy health bars than actual strategy. But overall, the combination of powers, gear, and leveling makes it feel like you're customizing your vampire in a way that fits your playstyle. You can focus on raw strength, stealthy attacks, or powers that let you control the battlefield. The RPG and choice systems are where Vampyr really shines. Every character you meet has a story, and the game keeps track of their relationships, secrets, and even how important they are to the community. Feeding on someone might make your life easier in the short term, giving you more XP and stronger abilities, but it could also destabilize a whole area of the city. Certain districts can get darker or lose key characters, which can even affect the ending you get. It's not just good or bad choices, it's shades of gray, and that makes you think carefully about what you do. The writing can get a bit hit or miss at times, and some side characters don't get fully fleshed out, but the main story and emotional weight are genuinely engaging. The world of Vampyr is another highlight. London is dark, rainy, and foggy, which makes the atmosphere feel dense and oppressive, perfectly matching the tone of the Spanish flu pandemic. Streets are empty or filled with scared, sick people, gangs are roaming around, and there's this constant feeling that the city is barely holding itself together. The visuals, sound design, and music all reinforce that sense of unease. You'll often hear coughing citizens, distant screams, or the quiet dripping of rain on cobblestone streets, which just makes exploring feel alive. It's a world that rewards paying attention to small details like overhearing conversations or discovering secrets in back alleys, which makes it feel lived in rather than just a backdrop for action. That said, Vampyr has its flaws, and it's worth being honest about them. The pacing can be uneven, there are stretches where you're grinding through similar side missions, or walking long distances between story beats, and the combat can start to feel stale over time. Some of the character interactions and dialogue don't hit emotionally as hard as they should, and a few narrative threads feel unfinished or rushed. Even with the morality system, some choices don't feel as impactful as you hope until much later, which can be frustrating if you're trying to see immediate consequences. But even with those flaws, the game's combination of story, choices, and world building keeps you invested. By the end, Vampyr isn't just about fighting monsters or leveling up, it's about living in a world where every decision has consequences, where surviving as a vampire is in direct conflict with helping people, and where the city itself almost becomes a character. It's dark, messy, and not always perfect, but that's part of its charm. The tension, the moral dilemmas, and the atmosphere make it a game you remember long after you put the controller down, even if some moments frustrate you or feel incomplete.
Come here. Nope.
Prototype is a game that basically lets you live out your fantasy of being an absolute super monster that destroys everything in sight, and it is one of the best power trips in gaming history. The developers at Radical Entertainment went all out to make a game about speed, chaos, and pure destruction, and it is just a non-stop good time. You play as Alex Mercer, who wakes up in a morgue in New York City with total amnesia, but he has these insane powers where he can shapeshift his body into deadly weapons. The story is a mystery where Alex has to figure out who he is and why the entire city has been quarantined by the military because of a massive virus outbreak. The gameplay is what sells this game because your movement is absolutely incredible. You can run straight up the side of any skyscraper, including the Empire State Building, in just a few seconds, and then glide across the entire city faster than any helicopter or car. It is just so much fun to ignore traffic and jump 100 stories in the air. The combat is incredibly brutal and messy because you can change your arm into huge claws, a giant blade, or hammer fists that slam into the ground and launch cars. You are constantly fighting the military, who are throwing tanks and missiles at you, and also hordes of giant infected monsters. The main mechanic of the game is called consuming people, because Alex needs to eat living things to heal himself and get stronger. When you consume a soldier or a civilian, you instantly absorb their memories and their identity, which lets you disguise yourself as them to sneak into military bases. This is how you upgrade your powers and piece together the story, so you are constantly jumping around and grabbing specific people to learn new skills. You can go from being a regular guy to having a giant whip arm that takes down helicopters in just a few seconds, which makes you feel like an unstoppable god of chaos. The game did get some flack because the color palette is kind of bland and gray, but that dark, messy look actually fits the whole Biohazard and destruction vibe perfectly. The story can get a little complicated, but honestly, you're playing this game to run up a building, rip a helicopter out of the sky with a whip, and then throw a tank at a military base. If you want a game that focuses entirely on making you feel like the biggest monster in the city, then Prototype is the one you need to revisit.
Now I gotta kill them too.
God of War 3 is absolutely bonkers, and it is the kind of game that screams pure revenge and spectacle right from the second you press start. This is the final chapter of Kratos' original Greek mythology saga, and he is not messing around anymore because he literally brings the massive titans out of the underworld to climb Mount Olympus and wipe out every single Greek god. The sheer scale of this game is ridiculous, because you are not just fighting normal-sized bad guys, you are fighting gods the size of skyscrapers, and sometimes you are climbing and running across the back of an actual titan while he is scaling the mountain. The gameplay perfected the classic hack-and-slash action of the first two games, and it feels incredibly fast and brutal. Kratos is a total tank, and his main weapons are the Blades of Chaos, which are those cool chains attached to his arms. But he gets a bunch of sick new weapons too. You rip weapons off of the gods you kill, like the Claws of Hades, or the Cestus Gauntlets, which are these huge metal punching gloves. The combat relies on doing massive combos, and then finishing the enemy off with these incredible and super violent quick-time events where you are tearing things apart. It is one of the goriest games of the PS3 era, and the developers at Santa Monica Studio really leaned into the brutality. The boss fights are some of the most famous in gaming history, because the first fight against Poseidon is just an insane sequence of cinematic chaos. You also get to rip the head off the sun god Helios, and then use his head as a lantern and a flashlight, which is one of the most metal gadgets ever put into a video game. The visuals absolutely push the PlayStation 3 to its limits, and everything from the character models to the environment details looks gorgeous and incredibly detailed. Even though Kratos is just filled with blind rage and revenge, The story does a great job of making you feel the weight of his actions as he brings the apocalypse down on the world. If you are looking for pure, unfiltered, epic action where you fight mythological monsters and gods and throw them around like toys, then this is the game you need to revisit. It is the perfect conclusion to the Angry Kratos story, and it is a masterpiece of over-the-top Greek mythology carnage. Mirror's Edge is one of those experimental masterpieces that still stands out because nobody else has really managed to copy its style and mechanics. This game came from the developers at DICE, who usually only make massive war games like Battlefield, but they decided to make a first-person parkour game, and it is absolutely genius. You play as Faith Connors, who is a runner in this super clean, white, dystopian city where all communication is tracked and monitored by the government. Runners are basically couriers who use the rooftops to deliver messages outside of the surveillance network. The unique thing about this game is the first-person perspective for the parkour. You are running, jumping, vaulting, and wall running all from Faith's eyes, and the feeling of speed and momentum is honestly unmatched. When you hit a perfect sequence of moves and you are flowing across the rooftops without slowing down, it is one of the most satisfying feelings in gaming. The whole game is designed around getting into that flow state. It uses a mechanic called runner vision, where the ideal path you should take is highlighted in bright red, which helps guide you without cluttering up the clean aesthetic. The visual style is absolutely iconic because the whole city is minimalist, super bright white and clean with stark blue skies, and the only color accents are the red lines that show you where to go. It makes the world feel cold and oppressive, but also beautiful at the same time. The combat is simple because the game actually punishes you for trying to fight back too much. The best way to deal with the guards is to use your momentum to disarm them and steal their gun and then throw it away immediately because Faith is not supposed to be a killer. You have to admit the game can be a little clunky sometimes, especially when you miss a jump and plummet 50 stories to the ground, but that just adds to the tension of the height. It is a short game, but it is so focused on delivering that one perfect feeling of free running across the rooftops that it is totally worth revisiting. If you want a game that feels like a breath of fresh air and looks unlike anything else, this is the one. BioShock Infinite is one of those games that hits you in a weird way because it's like a mix of crazy action, big ideas, and a story that messes with your head. You play as Booker DeWitt, a former Pinkerton agent who's sent to this floating city in the sky called Columbia to find a girl named Elizabeth and bring her back. At first, it seems like a standard rescue the girl setup, but very quickly you realize that Columbia is insane, in the best way possible. The city is bright, colorful, and full of life, but underneath it's super twisted. There's this really heavy political and social layer with class divides, racism, and a cult-like religion that controls everything. Walking through Columbia feels like you're in a painting that's just slightly off-kilter, and the contrast between how pretty it looks and how messed up the society is hits hard. The story is one of the most unique things about Infinite. It's got time, dimensions, and parallel universes all tangled together. And Elizabeth isn't just a sidekick, she's constantly helping you, interacting with the environment, giving you ammo and health, and sometimes opening rifts to bring in weapons or objects from other realities. That mechanic is super cool because it's not just a gimmick, it actually changes how you fight and adds layers to the storytelling. The narrative itself can get super confusing if you're trying to follow all the twists, but that's kind of the point. There's a lot of emotional weight too. Booker's guilt, Elizabeth's curiosity and fear, and the city falling apart make it more than just a shooter. Gameplay-wise, it's a mix of traditional first-person shooting with powers called vigors that let you do stuff like shoot lightning, control enemies, or throw fire around. The combat is fast and fun, and combined with Elizabeth helping out, it keeps you moving and thinking. There's also the Skyland system, where you can grab rails and swing across the city in fights or just explore, which makes the verticality of Columbia feel like a playground. It's one of those games where the world isn't just a backdrop, it actively changes how you play. That said, BioShock Infinite has its flaws. Some of the levels feel linear, and certain combat sections can get repetitive if you're relying on the same vigors or weapons too much. The story, while amazing, can be confusing or even frustrating for people who like a clean, easy-to-follow narrative. There are parts where you might wonder what's even happening or why characters do certain things. And Elizabeth is awesome, but she can sometimes feel like a bit of a crutch because the game makes her super useful in combat, so you don't always feel the same tension as you would in other shooters. But even with that, the game leaves a huge impression. Colombia is gorgeous, the story hits you with ideas you probably won't forget, the characters are memorable, and the mix of action and story is really tight. It's one of those games that makes you think about what you just played even after the credits roll. There's a lot to unpack, both mechanically and narratively, and that combination of gorgeous visuals, interesting powers, and a story that dares to be complicated is what makes BioShock Infinite still feel unique years later. Sunset Overdrive is a game that just refuses to take itself seriously, and it is honestly one of the most ridiculously fun and chaotic open-world games ever made. It came from the insane minds at Insomniac Games, who are famous for making Ratchet & Clank, so you know the weapons are going to be absolutely wild. The story is that a giant energy drink company called Fizzco messes up the launch of its new drink called Overcharge, and it instantly turns almost everyone in Sunset City into super violent mutants called ODs. You play as a janitor who survives the outbreak, and you're basically the last normal person in a city full of neon colors, punk rock vibes, and monsters. The gameplay is what sells this game because you are never supposed to stop moving. The city is your playground, and you are constantly grinding on power lines and railings, bouncing off cars and vents, and running along walls to get around. You have to keep this chain of movement going because the faster you move and the more tricks you pull, the more powerful your amps get, which are basically upgrades for your weapons and abilities. It is a shooter where traversing the environment is just as important as the combat, and when you are grinding across the rooftop while shooting enemies below, the flow feels absolutely incredible. Since it is an Insomniac game, the weapons are totally insane. Forget boring assault rifles because you are shooting vinyl records at bad guys, or using a device called the Acid Sprinkler that sprays acid everywhere. The most famous weapon is the TNT Eddy, which shoots teddy bears strapped with dynamite, and that just sums up the whole ridiculous mood of the game. The visuals are super bright and colorful, and the game embraces this punk rock aesthetic, which is a breath of fresh air compared to all the dreary brown and gray post-apocalyptic games. The whole game breaks the fourth wall all the time, and the humor is relentless and self-aware. When you die, your respawn animation is a different gag every time, like you emerge from a portal or a coffin, and it always makes you laugh. The missions are always super creative and over the top, and it is one of those games where you can just jump in and cause pure chaos for hours. If you want a fun game that lets you turn off your brain and just skate and shoot giant teddy bears, then you need to revisit this colorful madness. The Evil Within is an old-school survival horror that is straight up freaky. This game is important because it was directed by Shinji Mikami, who is the legendary creator of the Resident Evil series, and he basically went back to his roots to make the tense, limited resource horror that everyone missed. You play as Detective Sebastian Castellanos, and the story starts with him investigating a mass murder at a mental hospital, but he quickly gets pulled into a shared psychological nightmare world where nothing makes sense. The whole game messes with your head because the environment keeps changing and morphing into new, horrifying locations constantly. The core gameplay is intense survival horror because you are almost always running out of bullets and desperately trying to conserve your resources. The combat is intentionally clumsy and difficult because you are just a regular guy fighting off these insane, grotesque monsters, so every single encounter is stressful. The most important mechanic is the match system because when you finally manage to put a monster down, you have to use a match to burn the body, or else it will just get back up and attack you again. Since matches are also super rare, you're constantly making the difficult choice of whether you should burn one body or save it in the hope of grouping 3 dead bodies together later to save your matches. The atmosphere is absolutely disturbing and gross, and the game throws some truly messed up enemies at you. You have to fight creatures like the Keeper, who's a giant monster with a safe for a head and a hammer covered in barbed wire, and he represents the stress of hoarding resources. There's also a fast, spider-like creature called Laura, who is terrifying and relentless and always chases you through tight spaces. The game is packed with deadly traps everywhere like tripwires and spike plates, so you also have to focus on stealth and disarming the environment just to survive. It got some flack when it launched for running a little rough and being incredibly difficult, but that brutal challenge is actually what makes the game so rewarding. The story is pretty confusing and abstract, but it is worth playing just for the sheer tension in the incredible creature design. It is a true return to form for old-school horror, and if you want to feel that panic of only having 2 bullets left, then this is the one you need to revisit. Firewatch is one of those indie darlings that hit right in the feels and redefined what people expected from a narrative adventure game back in 2016. People try to call it a walking sim, and okay, fine, it is, but it is the best walking sim, hands down, because the entire experience is built around this incredible atmosphere and dialogue system. The dev team, Campo Santo, were basically industry veterans who came out of places like Telltale and Cry Entertainment, so they knew exactly how to make a story land hard, even if they only used a few core mechanics. The first thing that hits you is the visual identity, and it is absolutely sick. The artist, Oli Moss, gave the game the stunning, stylized look that uses these incredible warm colors, especially the oranges and deep reds of the sunsets and the fire haze. It's supposed to be Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming in 1989, and the world they created just looks like a beautiful painting, but you are the only human moving through it. This level of visual style combined with the powerful feeling of complete isolation is what sets the entire mood for the mystery. The core of the game is the radio dialogue between you, Henry, and your supervisor, Delilah. Henry, who is voiced by Rich Sommer from Mad Men, takes this job to escape heavy personal baggage, and his only connection to the outside world is Delilah, who is miles away in another tower. Their conversations are the main engine of the game. It feels so natural and real, not like typical video game dialogue. You use a physical paper map and a compass to navigate the huge open forest, which is great for immersion, and the choices you make on the radio are the only gameplay interactions that really matter because they shape your entire relationship with Delilah and change how she reacts to you later. It starts out super peaceful, just you hiking and reporting smoke, but the game slowly builds this incredible sense of paranoia and dread. You start finding weird fences, locked caves, and strange notes, and you begin to realize someone is listening to your private radio calls. That shift from a chill nature escape to a full-blown psychological thriller is masterful, and it gets genuinely tense because you're all alone out there with no backup. It is a tight, focused story that only runs for about 4 hours, but every single minute is focused on perfecting that atmosphere and those conversations. Yeah, the ending is super divisive because some people expected a huge, literal sci-fi twist, but the game is actually about personal mystery and human choices, and that journey is absolutely worth the price of admission.
Oh, look, they decided to have a campfire, too.
You know, they color-coded the fire danger signs in case people were illiterate, but I guess that doesn't take into account just plain stupid, does it?